Say a couple announcements, different things going on. Exam, remember how you guys asked me last, I think you asked me on Monday, I'm losing track of the days. You asked me on Monday, did we put the exam on Monday? And I said, no, I've already put it back. We're gonna put it back in. And a couple of you already asked me. So don't say I never gave you nothing, first of all. I don't want to she wouldn't support. You don't say any of that, okay? So, yes, take it. So this will actually give you an extra weekend. Okay, so a whole week back from where it was gonna be. Whole extra weekend, and I expect you to really pretty much study. I had a dream, so we had the exam, we pushed it back, and you guys did really good.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, okay, that's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna push it back, give you a little bit more time to study. You have the study guide. Now you have the study guide for a while, right? And you also saw, did I give you the option to fill in the study guide?
Yeah.
Okay, you gotta like make an assignment and fill it in. I recommend handwriting. But I'm old school when it comes to that. I really feel like it helps your brain learn and retain the information better. When you handwrite it, you draw it. But if you are a clicker on the keyboard and you prefer that, okay, cool. You got your tablet and you like all that stuff, whatever. But the point of that is I really want you to review and retain and learn the information, not just the day before the exam now, but you have a lot more time now to go over that. We're gonna finish the ear, because that's on the study guide too, and we're gonna go back to the heart and cardiovascular system. So I'm kind of jumping back and forth a little bit, but it's to try to keep pace with lab. Yeah?
So we'll have the exam and then lab after?
Yes. The exam will fall now on a Monday, which Monday is the 15th. Yes? And of course, we'll have lab that day. We're not gonna cancel lab. Yep. So your brains are gonna be tired, and I don't want you falling asleep in labs, paying attention in labs. So we will have the exam Monday, labs as usual, and actually my lab, I misspoke, I said we only have one lab, and then we have break, and we have the final lab practical, but we actually have 2 more labs. No, everybody's like, what? I'm always jumping ahead, because I'm neurotic. Because I know everything goes so fast, so I'm always like, okay, so we have 2 more full labs, and then we have break, and then you come back and you have lab practical 2. Final lab exam, pretty much, that's it, okay? So I'm going to try to sneak in more assignments and stuff there too. We've got some application questions, we'll have another quiz, and then we will, that study guide, completing that's like a whole full assignment, and then it's to force you to practice and repeat and learn the information. Okay, questions? Yes?
On Monday, on the exam, we also turn in the study guide, right?
Yes. Yeah, the instructions in the study guide, bring it on the day of the exam if you give it to me. I'm pleased you're not like Google share stuff with me. Don't do all that, I don't like all that. I get 40, 80 emails of students Google sharing and sharing and dropping. I don't wanna be on my computer more than I have to be, especially after online teaching and BS with pandemic stuff. So I like hard copies. Print it out if you can. Now printing is expensive, and you're like, oh my God, I have 18 pages I gotta print out. Maybe just show it to me. Just show it to me, here it is. Okay, here it is. After you're done with your exam, you can come up and show me. I just don't want to be on a bunch of electronic files all over the place. It's too much. It blows out my inbox. Yes?
If you print it out from the library and you go to the computers that are up on the desk, you don't have to pay for them. You know, it doesn't charge, I don't think.
Did you hear that?
But I haven't.
It does. I work for the IT desk, it does.
Oh.
Damn. Okay, well, this just all sucks. For those of you that don't want to print it out because cost is not reasonable, I don't blame you. Just show me a copy of it somehow, right? Just show me a copy of it somehow. Just have it on your phone, have it on your laptop, have it on your tablet, you have it all written out. I mean, the easiest way really would be, maybe I could print out a bunch of study guides. You know what, I can do that. For those of you who like to handwrite and fill stuff in, although you probably already have a jump on it, you're working on it, you're doing it electronic. You all do it electronically and I don't totally get it. Because for me, when I write stuff down kinesthetically, I write it down and then I draw it, I know it. Like I know it, I'm like, okay, I know it now, I'm good. If I click on a keyboard, I could honestly be watching my Netflix and doing that at the same time. Looking up the information, yeah, okay. It's more like definitions than like terms, but I really learn it. I think what I'll do is I'll print out a whole bunch of study guides with gaps in between, so a bunch of spaces, for those of you that wanna just like write it in and fill it in, and if you wanna go pay to print it out, I'll put it in my box, you can just grab it out of my box. I'm not saying you have to do that, but if you wanna do that, I don't want you to have to pay for it. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'll do that, I'll put a bunch of spaces and gaps, so for those, so it'll probably be, I'll have a bunch of packets, I'll be like 10 pages long. I'll just stick them in my box. Okay. The ear, so audition and balance, we went through the eyeball, we went through sensory receptors, special senses, and I leave out taste and olfaction, but we go over those in video more. So really I emphasize the eyeball and the ear. So vision and hearing as the two major special senses that we cover. What is that structure right here? What is this little curly cube? The cochlea, okay. And then what are these little structures up here? So loopy-doop, loopy-doop, loopy-doop. Say what, Roma? You had it, it was semicircular canals, right? Semicircular canals, and this is the vestibule. So this little bowl-shaped structure, the vestibule, and the semicircular canal. So what is that responsible for, this whole apparatus? Balance, vestibular sense or balance. What is this one? Hearing. What is the cranial nerve that actually carries information from balance and from hearing into one cranial nerve that goes to the brainstem? Vestibular cochlear nerve, excellent. What number is that? VIII, what?
Yeah.
That you're right, VIII is actually correct. Do you know that is 8? Okay, so you're right. Well, I mean, if you put VIII, that's correct, you go, points, full credit, right there. Shane, good job. You guys have to know Roman numerals, so if you don't know Roman numerals at this point, you should know them, because a lot of times in anatomy, in texts and prescriptions and different, you'll just see the nerve, like 5, 10. In cranial, not in cranial format, in Roman numeral format, the cranial nerve, what is that one? 5, what is that one?
10.
Okay, and you know if I add one here, that's 5 plus 1?
Yeah.
Okay, you know if I do that? So VIII is 8. Okay, and then the other way to do 10, if I put one behind the 10?
9.
Okay, good, what if I did another, well, actually, we wouldn't do it that way. Never mind all that, forget that. You know your Roman numerals, but yes, if you know the number, you know the Roman numeral, and you know the cranial nerve and what it does, that's important. So this one is vestibular cochlear nerve, cranial nerve 8, okay? And it is responsible for your 2 special senses. It's a 2-in-1, balance and hearing. Okay, structure of the ear. We have a model that looks just like this, exactly. It has this whole structure. It's got the outer ear, it's got the external acoustic meatus, okay? This goes through, this is all external ear. So we have the auricle or the pinna, which basically is like the ear flap. Like, you know, it has cartilage, right? It has cartilage in it and connective tissue, and it makes up that whole pinna or that flap. The lobe is the lobule, and that's like the part that has a lot of fat surrounding the bone. So I have a marker leaking all over me. Surrounding the bone, a bunch of fat in the lobe. That's what a lot of people get pierced, although some people pierce up in the cartilage and stuff as well, right? But the lobe, so you have the lobule, you have the pinna, the auricle or the pinna, and then the helix, this little helix that goes kind of the very outer piece that goes all the way around. Okay, so that's external ear. What we have in the middle ear is really important because we have a little drum. You hear about eardrum. That's the, what do we call the eardrum? The tympanic membrane, right? So we have an eardrum, which is a stretched out little thin sheet of connective tissue. That's the literal eardrum, the tympanic membrane. All of this is the middle ear. You should recognize these 3 little ear ossicles or ear bones. These are the smallest bones in the body. Remember? We have the stapes, the malleus, and the incus, and these are little tiny 3 inner ear bones that basically are bouncing when sound waves come in here at various frequencies or pitches, and they hit that eardrum.
It sends a vibration in.
Yes, exactly, Derek. It sends a vibration, it hits the eardrum, and it causes all those little structures, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Malleus, incus, stapes, the stapes looks like a stirrup, and it pounds against that little window. So it pushes those sound waves into now fluid waves inside of the cochlea, the fluid, and those waves cause the structures inside of this cochlea to basically ride up and down on those waves. Whether the wave is a short wave, and it goes like this, or it's a longer wave, and it's spread out more. So this is basically middle ear transducing air sound waves into the fluid of the cochlea. So that those little nerves that have hair cells can respond. And it's actually mechanoreceptors in that they respond to mechanical depression or being deformed. So you have these specialized little hair cells sitting on this membrane. You have a little set of them, and they literally have little hairs that stick out the top. Longest on the edge, and then they go kind of shorter and shorter. And when these ride up and down, there's a membrane that rides right above them. And when that basilar membrane, the base that they sit on, rides up and down with those sound waves, these, guess what happens to those little hairs coming out the top of the hair cells?
It hits the top and it like, or no.
They have little hair cells that sit right up, and there's a membrane above them, and when they ride up and down, they get squished and they deflect. So those hairs on these hair cells, and we actually call them for hearing, they're called hair cells. That's the actual cilia or hair that sticks out off the top. It deflects, it bends. And when these bend, they bend, all these bends, right? It actually causes an action potential to surge through those cells. They're mini neurons. Remember what I said about special senses? They're mini neurons, and their whole job is to convert one form of energy into another form, and that's an action potential that goes zip, zip, zip to the brain and tells you what you heard, in this case, what you heard, okay? So we have outer ear, the auricular, the pinna, the helix, the outer spiral edge of the ear, the lobule, the external acoustic meatus, which is the ear canal that goes to the eardrum or the tympanic membrane. Middle ear is the ear bones with the eardrum. Inner ear, or the internal ear, is this labyrinth, this bony labyrinth, which is the balance apparatus and the hearing apparatus with their connected nerve that goes to the brain on both sides, right? So it's symmetrical. We also, in the internal ear, well, more like the middle ear, kind of a segment between the two, we have this auditory tube or eustachian tube, which is the pharyngotympanic tube, which drains from the middle ear down to the back of the throat in the pharynx. And this is why there's eye, ear, nose, throat doctors, right? Because everything is all connected through the pharynx. So your ears, whenever you have equilibrium problems or an ear infection or fluid buildup, it can affect that whole area, right? Pharynx, throat, ears, sinuses, depending on what it is. Okay, so that's the overall structure of the ear. I don't spend as much time on the ear as the eye. We do a lot more of the ear in physiology, because there's a lot of physio and how it works and how you hear. But we'll stick mostly to the anatomy, a little bit of physiology to prepare you guys for physio that haven't taken it yet. So zooming in on now, what would this section of the ear be considered?
The middle ear.
Okay, so the middle ear, that's the internal ear, so we're focusing here. We have a few different structures. The auditory ossicles just mean bones. These are these tiny little bones. The malleus, which means hammer. The incus, which is the anvil, which all are connected to each other and pounding against each other. Ultimately, pounding on the stapes, which means stirrup. And if you look at it, it actually looks like a perfect little stirrup, right? We have these bones. These from a human ear. We have these in a little petri dish in the lab that I have. All three of these bones. And you can see the little one that looks like a little stirrup, that's the stapes. So, eardrum, tympanic membrane against the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Behind the stapes, it's actually plugging up this little oval window. This oval window actually kind of transduces these sound waves, these forces, into this whole apparatus here, the cochlea. And these waves travel down this cochlea, which is like kind of a spiral shell, almost like a seashell in construction. Okay? So that's, and then the vestibule and the semicircular canals, those are part of the equilibrium system. And actually you have 3 semicircular canals, and they're all at right angles. You can't see the other one, but they're all at perfect right angles to each other. And when fluid moves around in this bony labyrinth, in this vestibule, in these semicircular canals, that's what tells your brain which direction you were moving in, which direction you were rotating or moving linear in. So it detects position of the head, whether your head is back, forward, or down, and position of the head in terms of rolling or movement, rotational movement. All of that information in combination with what your eyes tell your brain allow you to maintain balance, equilibrium. Okay, so we talk about that more in physio. Cochlea here, this is all hearing, all hearing. So this is a 2-for-1 special sense organ, this bony labyrinth in the internal ear. Okay, so if we focus in on that internal ear, these different structures, and you saw this on the model, you can actually pull this out. Remember, for those of you who can just pull the whole little labyrinth out. We have the bony labyrinth, which is this whole hard structure of the cochlea, the vestibule, and the semicircular canals, one here, one here, one here. And then we have the internal parts of all this, which is the membranous labyrinth. So the whole thing is the bony labyrinth, because it's situated inside of the temporal bone, okay? But the inner part is lined by membrane and fluid inside, and we call that the membranous labyrinth. Yes? So bony labyrinth, inside is the membranous labyrinth. So we have the semicircular canals, ducts inside of the semicircular canals. Okay, so those are ducts inside of the canals. And then we have the cochlea, and there's a cochlear duct that goes right down the middle of the entire cochlear apparatus. What part am I missing? Stapes, oval window. Okay, so transducing, boom, 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 sound waves into the fluid of this structure. Ultimately, the end of this, there's a little round window right out here at the edge. So opening is the oval window, at the end of the cochlea, there's a little kind of round window. Stapes is in the oval window. Okay, yeah, that's I don't think I'd go too much into this. On your study guide, did I ask you what's the utricle and the saccule? I didn't?
No.
Okay, so don't worry about that. But in physio, you will have to know these, because they have different roles. They're actually located in here, and then down in these two different locations, and they're responsible for linear rotation of the head, and letting your body, your brain know where your head is in space. Semicircular canals with the fluid movements in those are responsible for rotational in different directions, different axes, rotation, okay? But I don't go over all those parts. Really what I focus on more now here for anatomy is the cochlea. So the structures of the actual cochlea and how it's involved in hearing. Because we also look at it under the microscope. Okay, so we look really closely at the cochlea, anatomy of the cochlea. So if we do a slice right through the cochlea, this little spiral snail shell or seashell, in cross section through the bone, it actually looks like this. So this would look sort of familiar, right? You all looked at this on the slide and went, what the hell is this? And then you see, okay, there's all these holes and they're kind of smaller at the top and they go bigger as they get down. It's almost like a fossilized shell. So that cut we're getting, it's like if you have a shell and it's kind of gets bigger and fatter to the bottom, we're cutting right through it. So the bottom chambers are bigger than the top chambers, right? And in ours it's more exaggerated, this looks more symmetrical, but in real life these are bigger, these are smaller. So if we hone in on just one of those, and we just say, okay, what's going on at the microscopic level? Let's look at one little piece through this cochlea. What's inside the cochlea that allows us to actually hear? If we blow it up, it's got all these different parts, and I do have you knowing these different parts. Okay, these at the microscopic level, these parts of the cochlea. Let's just do a quiz. Do I have one that's not labeled? Yeah, let's do that one. Let me just jump ahead and see if anybody remembers this. Maybe none of you are looking at the cochlea yet, or really paying attention to that, but we looked at it in lab, right? So this is just one segment going through, we're at one little piece, so we're like right here. We're just looking at a little section. Do you know the chambers and the membranes and where the hair cells are? Okay, let's go through it, let's label it. So that's a whole segment through. We've got 3 chambers. We've got one here, we've got one here, we've got one here. Yeah? So what would the middle chamber be called?
Is that the scalene media?
Scala.
Scala.
What'd you say, Jared?
Media.
Media, perfect. What's another word for that? What's another acronym for that? Or a synonym for that? That's right, Ronald. Cochlear duct. Why? Because that's where the hearing business is. That's where the hair cells are actually in that middle chamber, protected, right in that middle segment, or that middle duct. Scala means chamber, right? Or little so these are parceled out in these 3 chambers. All right, what is, and where are the hair cells? Where would the hair cells be? So they're in the cochlear duct in the scala media. The hair cells are actually sitting, and if I draw them, there's right here, they're kind of sitting right on this, and this membrane right here is what I tried to draw right here, that they're sitting right on top of. This is actually called the basilar membrane. Basilar, base, it's like the base that they're sitting on, basilar membrane. So the hair cells that would allow you to hear are basically this long segment going right through the scala media, all the way zipping through the cochlea. You've got this little set of hair cells that are tucked right in there. They're sitting on a membrane. That membrane is called, I just wrote, basilar membrane. And then there's sort of a membrane, it's hard to see here, but it's this one. It's sitting kind of right on top of them. It almost makes like a flat, like there's this membrane flat that's kind of, that I drew right here, that's sitting right on top. What is that one called?
Yeah.
Tectorial membrane. And I think of like tectonic plates of the earth, like tectorial, like as a plate, it's kind of sitting right on top of the hair cells, it's sandwiching them. They're sitting on the basilar membrane, the base. And then they're sandwiched, or what's on top of them, is the tectorial membrane. So when this membrane, when sound waves get pushed through this fluid, and this fluid actually conducts those waves through it, it goes up and down, it does this. So the basilar membrane and the tectorial membrane end up squishing those hair cells, and they deflect and they fire an action potential. Okay, so hair cells, outer and inner hair cells, we're gonna look at those. Tectorial membrane, and let's see, I'll do that. Tectorial, so don't say tectonic, that's just how I remember it. Tectorial membrane. Basilar, I'll just put basilar, it's membrane though, right? And then we have these chambers. Which chambers are these? What's the upper, the higher chamber, the more superior chamber, and the more inferior? Which one's scala vestibuli? This one? Good job. Scala vestibuli, or vestibuli. Scala vestibuli. What's this one?
Scala tympani.
Yep. Scala tympani. Tympani. With an I. And then what's this? There is a membrane separating, right? The media from the vestibuli. What's this membrane right here? You can barely see it, but it goes straight across. What?
The red.
Vestibular, what? Yep, vestibular membrane. Perfect. Yes? There's two different types of fluid too. The generic fluid that's in the scala tympani and the scala vestibuli, and then there's a special fluid that's high in potassium that surrounds these hair cells that allow you to actually hear. And in lab, on the study guide, I had this mentioned. I think I have it in the study guide for lecture 2 as well. There's two different types of fluid. There's endolymph, right? And perilymph. Where do we find the endolymph? Yep, right surrounding these hair cells in the scala media, the middle chamber. We find endolymph. And all you have to keep track of that is this is a little bit more special in its composition. It's got high potassium. So ultimately these hair cells, when they fire an action potential, a bunch of potassium, they have potassium and depolarization that happens as part of this signaling pathway, firing and sending that information. And these actually connect to neurons, basically axons that go all back. They send back information. These neurons send information back through the nerve that goes to the brain. So they go to a spiral ganglion. They have a cell body that's in a spiral ganglion, and the rest of those axons traverse in a nerve, the cranial nerve 8, that goes to the brain and sends information about hearing or what you just heard. Is that everything? That's everything. Yep, does that make sense? Okay, so you all should have pictures of this or drawings of this that you did in actual lab, hands-on in lab. So let me step back. Okay, so there's the structures, cartoon rendition. We've got, and actually that was something I didn't label on here. This whole section, this whole section right here we call the spiral organ of Corti. Because it's the business part of your cochlea. This is what allows you to hear. If I damage this, certain drugs can damage this, noise pollution can damage this, certain illness